how much of those early stages is really almost like an education on your part to kind of draw out? I see your eyes already.
Yes. You are so right. Oh my God.
Indicating that, yeah, there's a huge educational component. Have you ever wondered what it takes to turn a beauty concept into a market-ready product? In this episode of Demystifying Cosmetics, we sit down with a seasoned product development consultant who has worked across formulation, scale-up, regulatory compliance, and safety assessment for skincare, hair care, and color cosmetics. We dive into the intricate process of developing beauty products from the ground up, balancing innovation with safety, navigating the complexities of global regulations, and how that ensures a formula that is both effective and scalable. For today, our guest is Eva Sandnes. She's a natural product development consultant with over 20 years of experience in the specialty development of state-of-the-art emulsions. She has extensive knowledge of emulsion stabilization with the newest emulsifiers, stabilizers, as well as traditional approaches and new ways of approaching emulsion types for the delivery and stabilization of actives and skincare preparations. She is well-versed in developing high-loading UV and photostable sun protection formulations with a strong focus on sensorial properties. Eva also has advanced experience in developing hair, bath, and body care products, including the integration of natural concepts with new technologies. Good morning, Eva, and welcome.
Good morning, Jennifer. Thank you so much for having me.
Yes, for sure. And a fun fact, it's really not morning for you. Can you tell our listeners where you are coming from today?
Well, it's Oslo, Norway. So actually it's in the afternoon.
Yeah.
Yeah, we are a bit ahead, not for long though.
Yeah, great. And so, we previously had on somebody who was in the contract manufacturing world, and I'm really excited to dig into the perspective of, a consultant who has a little bit more of an intimate relationship with their clients and in that product development process. And so to start, would love to hear from you, overarching, what that typical product development process looks like when a customer comes to you from concept all the way up to commercialization.
So basically, so the truth is that most people who come and ask for a product in the cosmetic world, they have an idea, but they normally often they don't know actually what they want.
Yeah.
And in my experience, it's also sometimes possible that they didn't even make or done any market research. So they in a way don't really know what's possible or what's feasible, what's out there that is needed. But basically, you have an idea, let's say a moisturizer, let's say a balm. Balms are very much in. And then you try to describe a cosmetic product. But what makes it really difficult is that, that your words, I might not resonate to them. So what you mean, for example, it has to be a very rich, lavish, nourishing balm.
Yeah.
And then I think of really like something really rich. And then, oh my
like
God,
heavy,
this is awful.
Right?
Exactly.
Yeah, like heavy, very has a lot of emollients that maybe don't absorb well. Yeah.
And then, of course, so usually you would tell me that, okay, I have seen this and this on the market, something like this. I would like to just have a bit other sensorials, or and then one would obviously, of course, if there are materials that one doesn't wish or wishes. So all this is written down, and then the first prototypes are done. Then the client checks, and usually they come back with feedback that, oh, we would like to change this and that and whatnot. And then you take all these batches, and so basically at the end formulation that the client thinks it, okay, this is it, this we like. Then the real fun starts, because that you have to send till upscaling. You have at least I would done a preliminary microbiological testing, stability testing, adjustments again, and then we are back to upscaling. And when all this is stable, then you send them for the real testing, which is, as we know, it's the accelerated testing are not allowed in the EU. So if you want to sell within the EU or other markets that follow the EU regulations, you will need an extensive testing, which is 6 months. So we are talking about, and this I would like to emphasize on, because many clients don't really understand that the products that you see in department stores, they didn't pop up there throughout the weekend. It's minimum 18 months if you are quick. But big companies like L'Oréal and Estée Lauder often use actually as much as 36 months to develop a product. And you know, it also that you have to take it into account that it's very long lead times on materials, testings required, adjustments, reformulations, packaging is also another problem. And then, of course, you also have to, as a company, as the marketer, you need to have a marketing strategy. So it's a lot. It's not a 5 minutes work.
Yeah. And touching back to what you had mentioned in terms of, the vocabulary and maybe people coming not really with a fully fleshed concept, how much of those early stages is really almost like an education on your part to kind of draw out? I see your eyes already.
Yes. You are so right. Oh my God.
Indicating that, there's a huge educational component.
Well, yes, often it takes, so the problem is that the client, it's a shock. 18 to 30 months. Are you crazy? I don't have that budget. If we want it like 5 minutes ago or 10 months ago. And then, you have to tell them how these products, emulsions are built. And of course, what I think most people don't really understand is that, you have let's say you bake a cake and it's a fantastic cake, and you have done it like a million times and you love it and everybody loves it, and then you have this idea that, oh my God, I want to sell this on a big scale. I can be rich out of this. So you think that here's my little recipe, the formulation that you batch up for a small cake, and then of course you just, okay, 10 kilos or 20 pounds, you just add up and then put everything in a bigger machine. You mix it exactly as you do, and then the cake is not the same. Even the oven, everything, the whole procedure is the same. Your cake is either too hard or too soft or falling out or pouring out because it didn't bake. And then you are surprised at what's going on. And that is what I think many people don't really understand, that a cosmetic product, when you make it on a lab scale, is not the same as on industrial scale. This upscaling, many companies, they believe that, oh, that's not necessary, we can cut costs there. But the truth is, I mean, you are a formulator, you know this, that you need the upscaling, gradual upscaling, and minimum, I mean, even 5 kilos.
Yeah.
It's a big difference, 5 kilos and 100 grams.
Yeah.
But even 5 kilos will not, it will give you a projection. It won't give you the big picture. And all this, so the what I think that I educate my clients is this industrialization. There you make your money. All the prototypes development, that's an expensive, very expensive process.
Yeah. Yeah, and we'll actually touch upon that scaling up, because I do think that's a very interesting, but not, a lot of people focus on it in terms of product development. So
Exactly.
and you did say that multinationals, L'Oreal, the bigger players, they are aware of these timelines. But in terms of a lot of the indie brands, what do you see are some of the biggest challenges that they face versus those multinational corporations?
I think probably costs.
Yeah.
I believe that they it's an idea, and it might be actually a fantastic idea, a revolutionary idea.
Yeah.
But the cost for developing, for production, components, I mean, of course, that how expensive materials became since basically 2020. Packaging, if you're lucky to get hold of packaging, it takes a lot of time and it's very expensive, even though they come from often China. So I think the problem is that often small companies, they don't count on the real costs. They don't know. And they also, I think, I met many clients also from abroad, not only Norway, that they believe that, you can do this for free. because we will be big, but they don't understand that nobody can work for free. A producer, a contract manufacturer is definitely not going to work for free. It's not possible.
Yeah. There is a high burden to entry when it comes to, the minimum order quantity, right? For manufacturing and packaging and raw material costs, especially for commodity ingredients, that, sometimes does not align with, well, I want to launch 5,000 units, right? Then, it becomes really a challenge for formulators to identify ingredients that, have low MOQs and yet are within that overall price structure that the client is wanting to manage. So, thinking about scale up from lab samples to mass production, from your experience, what are some of the common pitfalls that you've observed when transitioning from small batch to large scale manufacturing?
Well, viscosity.
You're like, how much time do you have?
Exactly. Yeah, it's I mean, we could talk about this for like a week, but I think viscosity often is what you see, the visible parts, stability in both the microbiological and the emulsion stability. That's a challenge. Hence, upscaling is a must. You cannot escape that. You might end up with, but this is actually also valid, that you want to move from one contract manufacturer to another, and then you have all your materials, and of course, let's say they are region specific. And then you move to another part, and then you have replacement materials which one believe that one-to-one, and you have done this for like, I don't know, 20 years, and then suddenly your lotion, which has been nice and fluffy, good consistency, good viscosity, all this, and then suddenly it's just running, and then technical people will understand the problem, but you as a client, you won't understand this. You actually, I think most of these people would be like, what the hell is going on? What have you done wrong? They wouldn't understand that it's possible, but that's the thing, that your cake on industrialized scale is not the same. And this, I think, people who want to get into this business or are in this business must understand.
Yeah. Something that I found very frustrating, being both a consultant or trying to bring development in-house for brands, was a lot of time there was a fear of this tech transfer. And I kind of always said, if you have somebody technical leading that tech transfer, it will go a lot better, right? Because of things that you mentioned where, we scrutinize those product specifications to say, okay, this is going to impact it. And the reality is, when somebody at a contract manufacturer is on the bench making the product, they are no better off than we are, right? In scale up, they still have to go through those steps. And I think viscosity is an interesting one. And now I'm looking for, I think, a little self-validation, because I'm like, I've been saying this, but I want to make sure another person agrees. When I have a product and somebody says, oh, well, it's too viscous, I generally say, I have never reached the same viscosity in scale up. It's always been probably about 10% less, a little bit less viscous.
I agree.
And so you may want me to reduce the viscosity of that lab batch, but it's not going to translate one-to-one at scale up, right? Like, what you see when I give you is going to be a little less viscous at manufacturing scale. Have you observed the same thing?
Absolutely.
Okay.
It's exactly what I have been experiencing throughout all these years.
Yeah.
And it's always, again, so you and me and people who making these products, we see that these lab batches, they give you an idea. They are not the final product, but people from the outside, they take it at face value and believe that this is the final product. So they often, I also experienced it among others with makeup products where the fluidity was very important, for example, an eyeliner.
Yeah.
And it's perfect at batch, but no, it has to be thicker. It has to be denser. It needs more viscosity. No, it's perfect. And of course, you cannot, you can argue with your clients, but there is a limit. And at the upscale, of course, it was so runny.
Yeah. Oh gosh.
It was unusable.
Yeah.
So, but thanks God we did the upscale. They listened to me. So
yeah. And so, if there is anybody listening out there that's in the product development world, would advice be to have a little bit of a willingness to compromise on, okay, this isn't perfect, but let's see what it looks like at pilot scale?
Oh yes, absolutely. I think that so even you like the idea as a client, but maybe you would like to have a tad different consistency. I think you should just have that upscale and then decide.
Yeah.
It's also much more economic. You have a earlier stage where you can, what should I say, modify the product in any way that
Sure.
needed.
Yeah.
So absolutely.
And emulsions, I think, brings another level of complexity, and being somebody that is very well versed in emulsion chemistry, which is a very unique experience and very difficult to find. That translation of stability, what are some of the things that you either do before going into a pilot or know that you need to be aware of when it comes to emulsions, so that you can ensure or have some predictability for stability?
Well, usually, so what we would all do, I think, is that you have the brief, you know what to do, you choose the emulsifiers that fit in this brief, and then probably you would start with a higher amount of emulsifier, and then stability test your batch, and then decrease the emulsifier to find exactly the balance where the minimum but is still stable.
Yeah.
And then, of course, that would be a mistake to leave it at that, because that's most likely not going to be stable on an industrial scale and, traveling and
Sure.
all
Yeah.
this. So then probably you would adjust it a tad higher, at least I would, and then add additional stabilizers. And that's I think is a very important thing to know when you want to produce on industrial scale. You have to, it's a must. You cannot let your emulsion, even though it looks stable, it actually tests stable. This is not in your lab. It's not between your lab and your bathroom. Or maybe you I don't know, you don't even fly, you just go on a weekend trip and you take it with you to try it. We are not talking about this. We are talking about products that will travel in probably minus 25 degrees, like in Norway in the winter. They
Yeah.
might be outside on a car for 24 hours. God knows
Yeah.
where they are shipped from the Netherlands. Then they travel maybe 48 hours up to, let's say, the Nordic countries
Yeah.
or Canada for that matter. And then it stands in a warehouse, which is not heated. Then it's shipped to the stores. Then you ship it home. Maybe, as a client, you swing into a little clothing shop and this and that, and you are in North Canada. That product cannot separate. That's your number one mantra. That the emulsion must be stable at all costs. Obviously, that's a bit overdriven. You don't expect minus 60 degrees,
Yeah.
but
But it can
still,
happen. Yeah.
exactly. Let me tell you a little story without naming the company. It's a big company that back in 2006 launches a product. It was an emulsion, a moisturizer, nothing fantastic. The only fantastic thing was about that that time it cost $200, a little
Oh,
pot.
geez. Okay.
And this little pot separated in the stores.
Okay.
And of course, it was taken back, reformulated, remarketed with all
Yeah.
this. But when you looked at the structure, you saw that the people who actually formulated, they read the supplier's brief, where the supplier wrote that our emulsifier, actually it's not even an emulsifier, it's more like a stabilizer, will be enough alone to stabilize up to 20% oil.
Okay.
Exactly. And that's the thing, that they took it at face value. They didn't test it. They did that time it wasn't obligatory to test. So probably stability wasn't tested. And of course the product was separated already when it hit the shelves.
Yeah.
So that I think should be a good lesson for everybody, that no matter what your supplier says, if
Yeah.
it's the miracle product of all time, you will
Yeah.
always need several stabilizers, maybe co-emulsifiers, just to make sure, consistency agents, if you can use that, if let's say it's not a gel cream. It's many things that you have to take into consideration, and testing this the preliminary testing in the lab is a must.
Yeah. What has been really interesting for me in the consulting space is that I have been approached now and have multiple raw material suppliers that I'm working with because they're not sure how to approach evaluating their products.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, that at first I was very surprised. I was like, well, who is on your R&D team?
Exactly.
If you're not able to tell a customer that, what are these basics around HLB, and like, yes, you can replace, maybe this emulsifier because it has a similar HLB, but you're going to need to consider like percent solids and, the CMC value. I was very surprised. But I think it does, pull into that raw material suppliers have a different technical expertise, right? And so they provide the best guidance, but the onus really is on the brand, on the formulator to say, this is how I'm using it, and this is, how it's most effective. When we talk about emulsions and scale up in technology, what are some of the differences? And I know the answer, and this is why it's been hard to have a formulator on, because I'm like, I know the answer, but I'm going to ask it. But no, in terms of, the differences that you see, how much of a role does the contract manufacturer's capabilities and equipment play in ensuring that scale up is successful as well as that emulsion is stable?
Everything. Actually, you should always develop or try to develop your prototype on the same equipment as the contract manufacturer has. Always. It's as I said, it's not the same as baking a cake at home. It's completely different, and it's very much dependent on equipment.
Yeah. And I don't know if you've seen, they are starting to come out, and I think it's maybe ICA, the IKA brand, that has these benchtop systems that are supposed to mimic pilot scale, right?
Yes.
They're a closed system. They have the side sweep,
Yes.
maybe, the drop-in homogenizer. How they're very expensive, but how well do you think those do in approximating, a pilot scale? And is it worth maybe the investment for companies that have internal capabilities to use those?
I think it is. I have actually the same equipment.
Oh, nice. Okay.
So I do believe I what I have seen throughout these years is that there is a more success rate at upscaling without too much adjustments. The adjustments will be basically always needed, unless it's a toner, which is basically water. But normally you will need that. So but again, this lab reactor, as it's called, it's still half a kilo. It's 500 grams.
So it's a lot still,
will give you an idea, an indication, but it's still not 5 kilos batch. So, but I think I'm old-fashioned, so I learned this. This is how it should be done, at least back in the days, that you always have your equipment equivalent to the contract manufacturer or the producer.
Yeah. And, sometimes I feel like a lot of that, especially when you're getting in new materials that you haven't used before, a lot of times your batch size is dictated by how much of a sample a raw material vendor will get you. So like sometimes I hear 500 grams and I'm like, we're going to start, at 100, but that even comes with its own pitfalls. When I first started developing color cosmetics for a contract manufacturer, working within their R&D team, I remember starting at a very small scale. And what I failed to realize was that, I needed to be stricter about the variance that I allowed at that small scale. Because I remember I scaled up to, a kilo and the color was completely off. And it was like, right, because at 50 grams, if I'm 0.01% off with like a colorant, that error multiplies up the chain. And so, when you think about that with actives, even, right, where you have kind of this minimum efficacy, what is the advice that you maybe would give to formulators within either a contract manufacturing setting or people like us who independently do this, in terms of like how they should approach these small batches for reviewing accuracy as well as ability to, translate and scale?
To be honest, I think these small batches are only indications. these shouldn't be taken as anything remote to the final product.
Sure. Okay.
And also, of course, talking about measuring, a very accurate scale is a must. And when you work with the color cosmetics, then so 2 digits will not do you good. You will need many digits, very expensive scales, to be able to actually batch up. So small quantities are very difficult to batch up, but even bigger quantities, you need precision scales. You cannot do it without. And as you said, obviously, the color, I did the same. I have done it for a client, actually a color day cream, a BB cream.
Yeah.
And actually, it's quite good, truth be told. It won the one of the In Cosmetics prizes for best raw material producers prototype. And so of course, you work with precision scales, and then you get this. And when they wanted to give out samples, so they went to a contract manufacturer in France. Apparently they didn't own a precision scale, believe me or not. And the color was completely off. So it was because the original was some kind of gold nice hue, that the physical or inorganic filters were masked into skin color. They ended up with some kind of pinkish black, God knows what kind of hue. It was basically, they decided not to show that. They just showed what I made for them.
Yeah.
So obviously that equipment it's expensive, but that's your Bible.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, real quick. Raise your hand if you have dealt with active instability. If you have ever opened a jar of retinol cream and smelt an off odor, or noticed your formula went dark brown, chances are you are dealing with active instability. It's never fun when the formula you've been working on goes south and the due date is only days away. That's why we've encapsulated the trickier ingredients to work with so you can kick the stability struggle to the curb. From retinol to vitamin C, we make it easier to work with those ingredients that typically give you that 3 p.m. headache. The cellulose shell shields the active from outside exposure. Things like air and light that are likely to cause active breakdown, giving you the power to create stable and effective formulas without the trial and error. Ready to quickly create effective skincare formulas? Discover Tagra's Cellucaps line by going to tagra.com/cellucaps. So, have you encapsulated yet? Now back to the show.
So leading a little bit into regulatory and safety, which we mentioned earlier in the conversation, but to start, what are some of the biggest misconceptions brands have about regulatory compliance?
Oh, what shall I start? I think so often what I have heard is that, these authorities, they don't have time.
Yeah,
it's going to be fine.
Yeah.
So, and then the surprise comes when actually they are audited, and that can happen pretty fast. And then you lack your PIF files. You have a wrong INCI name. You didn't declare all the, at the moment, 26 allergens. All this. But I think also there is a misconception, and this is not only valid for small brands, but this is actually valid for much bigger brands, well-known international brands, that they produce a sunscreen. So sunscreens are regulated as cosmetics in the EU, while, of course, almost the rest of the world, drugs.
OTC.
OTC drugs, exactly. And then, to be able to sell OTC drugs, they have to be manufactured in the pharmaceutical standards.
Yeah.
So the FDA is very good at actually coming to Europe, to big companies, and check how these sunscreens are manufactured. And they discover that it's cosmetics, and that you cannot allow in North America.
Yeah, I've seen that actually most recently with a brand that had an email that they sent out that said, "Hey, we're no longer allowed to. We're no longer going to distribute." I shouldn't say they said it loud, because the way they phrased it was, "We will no longer be delivering this to locations in the U.S." And it is a very interesting I think specifically for SPF products, because, the EU has far greater, I think, oversight and into the safety and pre-registration for cosmetics, but, SPF being that kind of outlier. And, are there any other significant differences that you encounter, especially, because your clientele is everywhere globally, that you see in terms of the global regulations that differ from, these larger markets of the US, EU, let's say China, the Middle East, Africa? Are there any really big differences that you encounter in global regulations?
Absolutely. It's let's not dwell on China, because that you cannot do on your own. You need a local person who speaks the language. So is Japan. But the regulations, the mandated dossiers and everything, you have to be able to know how these are, because the EU, the US is now not so far behind. Of course, they still allow accelerated testings, which were fine in Europe as well before. And there is another reason for making it that it has to be real life testing.
Sure.
But that's one thing. But I think you have to also understand that all the material, all the technical documentation is around the product, you must have that. You can't just believe that I can launch this and I will fix that. I will do that later. It has to be in place.
And something that just came to mind when you spoke about accelerated testing that I've always encountered and found it difficult to navigate was, accelerated testing is, at the current moment, the best, I guess, approximation we have for understanding the longevity of a product without real-time use, especially if, I want to put a 3-year expiration date. We don't have the luxury of waiting 3 years. So we default to this, kind of accelerated testing. But something that I've always found problematic was when you start to use actives, right, that are heat liable, heat sensitive, that, you really aren't supposed to be adding into a formula above 40 degrees Celsius. And so when you start to look at those, high actives or sensitive active formulations, what kind of advice do you have to extrapolate shelf life when, inevitably that 40, 50 C is likely going to cause discoloration, is likely going to cause degradation of that active?
I think as the manufacturer or the marketer, you need to decide that is it acceptable or not. And of course now, before it wasn't. So basically the 70s, 80s, I cannot go back before the 70s because the inky name in the US didn't start before, I think, 74. So it's not available, and products, it's nothing from the 60s that you could actually analyze. But in the 70s and 80s, it was very common to have up to basically 25% active ingredients, believe it or not. And it's basically, even mid-90s, often it was 1 full percentage of actives, several of them. Obviously not 25, not 15%, probably 3%, max 5%. But around 2000, all this changed. It's very, very minuscule amount of actives, basically label claim. There are patents from big companies showing that many small, extremely minuscule amounts, they will have the effect of more than if it was more percentage. Of course, this is what they want to prove. But now with the indie brands, we are back to high percentage of active ingredients. And I think so there it's even more important actually to test it properly. And test your products that will they survive if, and it's not only in testing conditions, but many people at home, they have maybe 30 degrees in the bathroom, and imagine that product stands there for like 6 months, maybe a year. You never know how will it look when it's a nice white color or light beige, and then in 2 months it's like brown. This is not what I paid for.
Although I recently got a product that had that little disclaimer on it, right? That said, due to the natural origins of the raw materials, you may see darkening over time. How much of that, can consumers say, oh, okay, then, is it a psychological thing at that point where you're like, oh, well, my expectation should be low?
You know what, truth be told, I have had actually several suppliers pushing their natural raw materials, excellent raw materials. And they send me prototypes of emulsions, and they are this light brown. It's awful, to be honest with you. And I always think that, okay, being young in the 90s, where emulsions were actually gorgeous, they smelled good, they looked like pink or light yellow, but they looked appetizing and smelled good. When it's light brown, it's not exactly that. I would think that this is nice. And then, of course, no silicones, so it makes it that it's like soaping, like the 70s, even 70s, 70s had the silicones. But it's really like, you just, this cannot be, I mean, we can make far better products than this. And then they tell me often that, yeah, you shouldn't put any colorings anymore. The clients love this natural color. Yeah. But I don't think they do. I see in department stores, I don't see, actually, I see the products that are like this, they are discontinued in like 3-6 months. People don't want this.
Yeah. And so when, brands are thinking about how to design products to meet both the compliance on a global scale, as well as safety standards and stability, what are some best practices that you would advise them to proactively do, or to start with, even before you are putting together a formula?
Well, truth be told, I'm not sure that brands without technical expertise would be able to do this without some kind of technical background. But I think, so basically having a consultant just on this technical aspect would be a good payoff, because you could design your product already from basically the beginning. What you want, what kind of materials that tick the boxes, hopefully with an expertise that the person knows different emulsifiers and their contribution and so forth, what they are compatible with. That there are, I am not sure that I should say this, but a client of mine came to me with a material that was new 2 years ago for a hair care product and not compatible with cationics.
Oh, okay.
Non-ionics were off. It was like, and it cannot tolerate a pH. I think it's 6 is the highest. It's like, okay, and it doesn't tolerate low pH either. And then you want to make a hair care product out of this.
So you're like, so this in water is basically.
But you know what? I have done that as well.
Yeah.
The product separates.
Oh gosh. Okay.
So but I love challenges. This one was like, oh my God, this is exactly what I wanted. This you need. You need to hustle up things. You have to see what's out there. And there are emulsifying complexes, which are emulsifiers if you want to have a non-ionic product. Skincare, for example. But in a certain pH, they behave like cationics, and they have conditioning properties for hair. And actually, that little window between 5.5 and the 6 of this other material, it fits. So you could actually make a hair care product. The other challenge was, so these are proper emulsifying complexes, no problem with stability, but this active material, the bloody active material, to say that, it makes everything unstable, fully unstable. So you know what, that was really a challenge to make it that it actually, that thing at the end that actually stayed stable for proper testing and long time. The only thing actually that I think saved my client is that, and that's also that's number one before you start with things, that you have to be able to understand that the materials you select, they have to be able to be on the market. It cannot be that it's a unique material like this one is, that nobody will buy. As long big companies don't buy, it will be discontinued. And the product actually is nobody, no big companies took it in. Most likely will be off the market pretty soon. So that's also, you use so much money on developing a product, and then you don't have the active material afterwards. So
Yeah.
that I think there is a balance that okay, niacinamide, everybody uses it. Do I want it? No, I don't want it. But yes, I do want it because actually I can get hold of it no matter what.
Yeah. Yeah, that is a challenge, right? Where it comes to unique ingredients and you think about like, well, if this is discontinued, I have to reformulate, right? There's no subsequent supplier, which becomes a challenge to balance, right? Innovation with scalability and long-term thinking. What's interesting when you talked about too, that kind of little window when we talk about pH, I'm always surprised, when you do like a product specification or a sample C of A for a product, generally you have these wide pH ranges where you're like, oh, 6 to 7. The reality is that the like pH scale is logarithmic, right? So that's a tenfold change.
Oh yeah.
So, I think people often think of pH as just being like, oh, well, it's just 5 versus 6. It's like, actually, that's huge. And so some products may require these much stricter specifications, which, so I think also pairs with like, well, then you really need to be selecting a contract manufacturer that is also, well versed in kind of being able to have these environmental controls or, manufacturing controls to produce consistently a product within the specifications if they are quote unquote tight, right?
I agree.
I think touching on a little bit of what you said in terms of like having somebody technical, you and I have had this conversation, and I've had this conversation with a number of people, and I've always phrased it in terms of when I'm going into an organization and I say, well, you can have two different kinds of product developers. You can have those that are very in tune with the market, and they're really in tune with marketing, branding, and this is emerging, and these are fun ingredients. These are buzzwords. And then you can have the people that are highly technical, still know very similar things, but maybe aren't going to be the people you go to come up with claims language, right? They're the ones that are going to say, fun ingredient, but it's only water soluble and you want to put it into a stick deodorant, those kind of things. And so, you touched upon it, but how critical do you feel it is that product development within brands, within contract manufacturers, whatever it may be, have some sort of technical expertise within their wheelhouse to how critical is that for the development and the speed at which you can develop a product?
Oh, I think it's very critical.
Yeah.
You can't, you pointed out extremely well that some people will know more about the market, these buzz ingredients.
Yeah.
But it's still, it cannot compare to the technical expertise. Plus that, all the time that you could save on reformulation and changing your ideas and choosing a material that is actually will be available in a year or two, and so forth. It plus that the whole design. So from the moment you think of a product, it will cost you so much more than when you don't have this expertise, or when you have this expertise in house but you don't listen to the person.
Yeah. Familiar with that. And and I would, to any brands listening, advise that they do have a technical person, because a lot of times, right, you're defaulting to your contract manufacturer. And if you don't know the questions to ask, you operate to some degree as, blissfully ignorant, and saying, well, my product's fine. They know what they're doing. And then you peel back the curtain and you're like, I'm sorry, why don't you have this documentation? Oh, hey, the compositional statement says that there's 2 ingredients you don't have listed on our IL, those kind of things. And so I think it is very critical to have some technical expertise, whether that be somebody you're consulting with or embedded within the organization, because it does help the process as well as, reduce the need for reformulation and reduces risk overall.
Absolutely. Plus that, let's not forget that if you, for example, you don't have this expertise and your contract manufacturers will produce the required product, first of all, it's not sure that they have the expertise. They hair conditioners, we all know that there is a golden balance, a golden triangle when it comes to fatty alcohol and conditioning polymers.
Yeah.
Either it gets too heavy, or
greasy. Yeah.
Exactly, or it doesn't condition. So what's the point then, right? unfortunately, this is my real life experience. So this is not a nice thing, but some contract manufacturers actually add up to 10% cetyl alcohol in a product. That means that you don't have any volume left.
Yeah.
And how do you rinse it out? And of course, they put it in so they can bill the client more. I have seen hair conditioners and emulsions where it's so much structuring agents that doesn't make sense. Of course, the product's sensorial properties, especially when it's a skincare product, you will feel it more than in a hair care product. But it's also, you have this technical expertise, you will see that, well, maybe let's halve that. And then my cost will also actually maybe not half, but 1/3 less.
Yeah. And I think it's also, to be said, to be honest about what you're good and not good at, right? I am not well versed in hair care. I've done it before, but I wouldn't feel comfortable advising somebody who's looking to launch a multinational hair care brand. That's just not within my wheelhouse. And so I think the same with contract manufacturers, you really have to familiarize yourself with what they're very good at, maybe what they're okay at, and maybe, advise on when you should look elsewhere. So I do think there is something to be said, like not all contract manufacturers are good at everything, and we shouldn't expect them to be.
Exactly. But this is how it is. We are not all of us good at making soups or cakes.
Yeah.
We might be not even good at any of those, but maybe just one of them, right?
Yeah. Very true. So moving on to some, I guess, maybe more fun things. Let's talk a little about ingredient and formulation trends, especially in advance of, kind of in cosmetics, which is generally, the time where the industry is revealing all the new innovations that they've been working on. What, from your perspective, are some exciting innovations that are happening in either the skin, hair, or color cosmetics? What are some of the things that you've seen in the past, few months?
Well, I'm not sure that we can call them innovations because we are back
just
again.
A return. It's a very right secular. Okay, what is being recycled?
So, yeah, exactly. So NAD or NAD. NAD.
Yes,
that's coming back again. It's nothing new. It's fantastic. Yeah. For example, Mibel biochemistry, they have NAD plus raw material from sunflower seed sprout, which is, of course, a completely different inky name. So that I have seen now several of these materials, the longevity materials that are, again, I mean, this is nothing new again. One should not, many people believe that this is new, but this is not new at all. There are many patents since 2008 on longevity and the botanical extracts.
Yeah, I feel like maybe it's one of those things where we forget about aging because we convince ourselves that we've addressed it, and then we're like, "Oh crap, I have wrinkles again," and so that's why it just keeps happening. It just cycles through. And then, so when we talk about new ingredients, and you mentioned this in terms of the one that you were presented with, but how do you evaluate new ingredients, especially new, not like recycled, but let's say things that are emerging in the biotech space, let's say, or new inkies? How do you assess them for both performance and safety?
Well, usually so basically what they replace, if they replace something, which often the case nowadays, I usually like to have the same formula and then just replace the new material with or the existing material with the new one and have the two similar or the same formulations and see the sensorial aspects, the stability, of course, viscosity, so all the aspects evaluated. And then what I would recommend to brands, actually, if you do this, to have a test panel that will test actually these prototypes to get what should I say, a correct or a proper feedback, because it's one thing that we ourselves test it and it might be that I like it or I don't like it, but it won't reflect actually what most of the people will prefer.
Yeah. Yeah, I have found that even just doing like the physical chemical characteristics to see how far you are away from, right? Like I even have done some imaging where I'm like, this is an emulsion with polysorbate. Here's an emulsion with yours. Like you see how big the circles are, right?
Exactly.
Like that's going to be an indicator it's different. Something though that I have found a little bit concerning, and I don't know if you've noticed the same, is I have encountered people that are creating new, relatively new ingredients, and I ask, what have you done for safety? And they say, oh, well, I've done, we've done RIPT, we've done ocular, and I'm like, but this is a new ingredient. Like, what have you done for tox screening? Have you looked at the, any of the required testing for new ingredients based on the, SCS guidance out of Europe? And it seems like there is, a lot of times people consider that, well, we'll launch it and then we'll do those things.
Truth be told, I would never use a raw material that is not fully tested in every aspect, and the producer doesn't disclose the test results.
Yeah.
And I have been saying this for 20 years at least, that you should always buy your raw materials, your sample materials, everything from reliable sources. And those are European, North American manufacturers, Japan, South Korea, of course, fantastic raw materials. But buying raw materials from China, there are some very, very good peptide companies, reliable and proper. Of course, truth be told, that they often copy patents from European and North American manufacturers without any consequence. But those probably reliable enough. They also have all the data, toxicity, and all of it is complete. But structural materials, I don't think you should ever touch anything from China.
Yeah. And I think that's good advice. And also, for any raw material manufacturers out there, I think it is worth the cost of doing those tests, of looking at, Ames test, at photosensitivity, any of these in vitro, analogous animal model replacements for your materials, because I think that people like you and I, as well as those that working for brands, are becoming more sophisticated and also less risk tolerant, right? We live in a very litigious society, and so the risk is very high to use materials that maybe aren't critically substantiated. So to close our conversation, we obviously have touched upon a bunch of different things and could go down rabbit holes of various things, but I do want to end on a good note in terms of, well, I don't know if it's a great note, but if you could think about changing one thing about how the beauty industry approaches product development, what would that be?
Well, maybe since we don't have 3 hours on this, I think my biggest wish would be that people would actually understand that materials that are allowed in the EU and in maybe not North America, because that's a much broader aspect, but by the European legislation, they are proper materials. Nothing wrong with them. They are safe. They have been diligently tested for decades, several times. Picking out materials and hanging them up and titling them that they are bad or they are so-called unclean. I think that should be stopped. That's a very bad. It's very bad for you as a brand. It really spreads misconceptions about actually the beauty industry, about materials, and so-called natural materials. What is natural? That material is not your sunflower seed oil that you can steak or bake with or drink it. That material has been through many chemical steps. It's so far from that sunflower oil as it can be. And so I also believe that maybe the EU, hopefully the US as well, they should maybe be a bit stronger when it comes to these differentiations, that they shouldn't allow brands, that already is sulfate free. My problem is with that is that, first of all, those people or companies that want sulfate free, they don't actually know what it means. They don't know that now we are touching actually health, because your scalp, for example, a shampoo without sulfates will not cleanse as well, and you have to cleanse your scalp. We are not talking about only your hair.
Yeah. Like it touches your skin, right? And yes, yeah.
Exactly. And then we circle back again to preservation and the mandated real life preservation testing in the EU, and hence also the stability, because preservation, believe it or not, of course you know that, but it has it changes stability.
Yeah.
And then the old days, when parabens were the gold standard, actually it was a revolution, and parabens are very mild, by the way.
Yes. Widely effective at very low concentrations.
And cheap.
Yes, and inexpensive. Yep.
And they are very mild.
Yeah.
And then you people also that are not, they are not versed or well versed in preservation. They preserve products and package it in a jar, and of course they started molding and all the good things. That of course also makes that the EU needs it not only the EU, but the US also will eventually come on this. I think that you will need the real life testing to see that the preservation is correct. And one more thing on preservation is that while in the US you don't need actual preservatives, you don't need anything from the annex which are classified as preservatives.
Yeah.
But in the EU you do need that. You must have at least one preservative that is classified as preservative. And many especially American brands that entering Europe or want to enter, they forget this, even though the challenge test and everything is completed and fine, and the product have been on the market for 5 years.
Yeah. It's so going into that, a little bit of a tangent, but related for preservation. When I first entered the industry, and I had to do a lot of, we did a lot of continuing education at the first company I worked at. And this was when I was, like in my 20s. I remember the first story I heard about, they did very good, examples of case studies. And one of them happened to be about a salon that had been offering immunocompromised. So basically people that had cancer and didn't have hair, a salon day. And so they would, pamper them because they didn't have hair, and, they wanted to have that sense of normalcy. Unfortunately, they were using product that was not properly preserved. And when using it on the scalp, the microorganisms that were growing in the product were able to enter and compromise and cause real damage and even death to individuals that were part of that day. Right. And that to me, that stuck with me for the rest of my career as being, a prime example of what can happen when something is not appropriate. There are real consequences, right? And and so to me, that's always been a part of a thoughtful approach, is understanding that, there is going to be a wide variety of individuals that will be using your product. And, you need to ensure that it follows what is the, kind of just the lowest level of entry, which would have ensured, right, that these individuals would have been safe. And so I think, while I'm not a big fan of that kind of learning style of like dire, consequences, it really is true, right, that there are considerations that formulators need to make for safety, knowing that, you're creating this, yes, for somebody, but it could be used by millions.
Exactly.
And that is kind of a responsibility that we burden. So, well, thank you.
Thank you.
This has been wonderful. I appreciate your time. And for all the viewers out there, where can we find you? What is the name of your consulting company? I didn't touch upon that.
It's Derma Solutions.
Derma Solutions. Okay.
So you can find dermasolutions.org, and you can also find me on LinkedIn. So you can also send me a message there.
Great. All right. Well, thanks so much. This was really enjoyable, and I appreciate.
Thank you, Jennifer, for your time and for the invitation.